the Swiss are like almost as bad as us in terms of fibre rollouts, and I had a look, and it's something like 7% penetration fibre to the home.
Right.
So they're down at the bottom of the league with us. So
Yeah, they've used
5G.
a lot of G-fast, and
yes, yeah.
because they've got sort of difficulties in getting it up mountains.
You
and
could
all that
you
rubbish.
could say their coverage map looks like Swiss cheese.
Oh,
There.
on fire today.
But they're
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I'm joined by the usual suspects, Jamie, who's in the middle of an online game. Are you, Jamie?
no.
Oh,
just
he's done
Instagram
that. He's just having a stretch, bless him. And Ian, who's paying attention. Thank you, Ian. And just as a reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook or on the site, you can listen to it on SoundCloud or iTunes and vice versa.
Actually, no, it's not.
What?
It's everyone. It's not just SoundCloud or iTunes. It's Google Podcasts.
Oh yeah, that's
it's
true.
Everything.
Yeah, we realised that it
Yeah.
goes on a bunch of different platforms. I still reckon those other platforms
Even though
probably...
you weren't aware of it.
No, I think they derive
That's
it from
a bit dodgy.
SoundCloud.
Yeah.
I think when we do our
Is that-
SoundCloud... Do you do a separate upload to iTunes?
No.
So it's all
the
from SoundCloud?
RSS feed.
Sounds like a violation of GDPR to me.
All right, well, perhaps we better start again before we land ourselves in it. Anyway, if you didn't do it, watch it, listen it, do both. I don't care.
Turn it off right now if you want to.
Yeah. And what are we going to chat about this week? I think we're going to chat about 5G. There's been a bunch of stories to do with 5G as it's starting to actually appear in the wild. There's been
The
some
Wild East.
The Wild East, if you want, yeah. Although it's cropping up in the US as well.
Yeah, kind of.
You can do critique my little opening spiel.
No.
That's good. That's
Right.
good.
If I can just continue. We're going to talk about where technology and politics overlap, and then we're going to finish off by talking about notspots and what to do about them. So there we are, and I've managed not to say Huawei in the opening thing for the
You
first
just
time in
did.
about a
Not
year.
Huawei spots.
Yeah, not
that,
Huawei
That
spots.
comes into it as well.
Well, Huawei will crop up, but as long as they're not one of the three lead ones, I don't have to put it in the
Yeah.
headline when I'm writing the thing. 5G, okay. So 5G, I guess the main thing about 5G is we're actually starting to get commercial launches. So here we are, we're only at the start of Q2 2019, so that's probably about a year ahead of where we thought it'd be a while ago. I think South Korea's leading the way. You got a message?
From Pizza Hut.
From
Get
Pizza
a
Hut.
large pizza, an ultimate dipping box. For
You've interrupted the start of this
Sorry.
podcast because you got a bit of spam from Pizza Hut.
Wow.
I thought you were on a diet anyway.
Yeah, except on Fridays.
Right, okay. It's launched in Korea. And
Which one?
yes, North Korea's still on
They're-
2G, I think.
They're the pioneers, North Korea.
Yeah. It's launched in South Korea. And Wei wrote a piece talking about some of the tariffs. There's basically three operators there. There's Korea Telecom KT, there's SKT, and there's LGU+.
Mm.
And they've all announced their tariffs. And they're quite reasonable. I think they wanted to hike the price up, but the regulators of the government went steady.
Yeah.
Less
So
of that.
now they're not going to make any money out of it at all.
Well, they'll make less money. I mean, that'll always be what operators say, is that they've got to charge a ton, otherwise they never make any money. But that never
Yeah.
turns out to be the case, does it?
No.
Anyway, now the only thing, sort of reviewing Wei's piece in the week, the only thing I found slightly odd about it is, I think perhaps as part of their appeasement of the regulators, they've come out with some cheaper ones, but they've put a sort of bandwidth limit on it, which is quite low, like about 5 megabits per second. Now, I did a little...
Oh, because I thought those limits are usually on usage. Like if you go above 8 gigabytes a month.
No, so
you
yeah,
start
so
to
there's
have your
obviously
speeds raised back.
an overall cap
Yeah.
in terms of the
But
amount
those
of data.
caps looked high though, didn't they?
But there was also a bandwidth cap, I think, just on the cheaper ones. So it almost
doesn't
feels
that
like
mean once you go over your allowance, then it's
It could be
you
that.
go
It
onto
could be that.
a rubbish 3G network or something. But the allowance itself's quite high. Yeah. It's
no, they only start, the cheaper ones start at about 5 to 10
Gigabytes.
gigs.
That's
It's
quite
not that high. Well, not if you're going to be doing, because I think SKT, where
Well, they're all watching mobile video over
Well,
there, aren't they,
exactly.
on buses. And,
That's 5 movies.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean.
and they're just watching. They weren't only watching very wholesome video on those buses. It should be
Not
added.
like okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't.
Okay, let's just park that. Yes, I mean SKT Wei wrote a follow-up piece saying SKT's offering all this premium video, all this streaming in 4K, which we're supposed to suddenly need to do on our tiny little phone screens. And obviously you're going to gobble up 5 to 10 gig in no time if you start doing that stuff. So anyway, I just got the impression in the cheaper tariffs there was some weird little restrictions. Like I just did a speed test just to remind myself what I get. I'm on EE in London, and I'm getting 27 megabits per second.
Right.
So some of these caps at 5 to 10 megabits per second on a 5G,
low, yeah.
it just seems odd. Now maybe I haven't fully understood it. Maybe it's once you get past the threshold or something like that.
It must be, because otherwise it's sort of... I mean, SKT was also saying peak speeds on the network are up to 2.7 gigabits per second.
Right, yes. So that,
I mean,
that
no
was
one's going to get
that was odd. I was struggling with that. Yes, so that's there. But clearly, I think KT have got a completely uncapped one that's a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
So I think whether I've understood it correctly or not, what they're trying to do is like you can have cheaper ones, but they're shit.
Yeah.
If you want to live the 5G dream, you got to pay top whack. So I get the impression cheaper ones are just there to placate regulators.
I doubt anybody's going to. That many people are going to sign up anyway at the moment, because apparently there's only one phone available. Yeah.
The Galaxy S10
Right.
is the one that's going to go.
Is it out?
Funnily enough, a Korean
I
phone.
don't think so.
And probably
No,
very
but
expensive.
I think it's due to launch very soon. Yeah, it is
And
very
the
expensive.
super expensive, rubbish battery life.
Yeah.
Oh, you've read crappy reviews about the S10 in general?
No, this
have
is
you?
just based on... I mean, I don't know much about phones. This is just based on watching
Okay.
people like Dan Jones chatting about this at Mobile World Congress.
I mean,
where he was
is
saying,
this the
wouldn't
phone
buy-
in general, or is this specifically when
I
it's
think
running
5G phones at the moment just aren't considered to be
A
that
5G
good.
modem is like really energy hungry or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of issues, aren't there,
Right.
at the moment in terms of usability and,
Okay.
and battery performance and all that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
this is a because they were supposed to launch actually a few months ago, weren't they? They were supposed to launch in January,
right.
and they did claim to have launched in January, but it turned out what they were doing was just kind of pilot stuff with enterprises using boxes and
Those usual incremental.
Yeah.
We're nearly there.
we're nearly there. But it's almost more interesting stuff in a way in terms of the use cases, I think, but certainly not the kind of mass market consumer rollout that excites newspapers and gets kind of headlines, because you
Indeed.
can get super fast broadband in, like you say. Don't really need it anyway, but
Yeah, well, and
Everybody
Korea's
gets worked
obviously a
up
good
about
place
it.
because nearly everyone lives in Seoul. So
do they?
It's. I think it's like in terms of the proportion of the population of the country that live in the biggest city. I think it's right up there. Obviously, not everyone, but
You'll get the early adopters, I guess, racing to do it. But
Well, one of them is, and I can't remember which one it is, or they didn't mention it actually. So I went to a Huawei briefing last week.
the
and they were
LGU Plus then.
What?
That's
Well, they
the
just
Huawei
said sort of
customer.
like an Asian
Right.
brand, and what they are actually doing, they're introducing a low latency mode on the phone. So basically,
Right.
for an extra $1 a month, you can turn on low latency, and there will be some restrictions, like X amount of data or anything along those lines.
Right.
But it's for gaming. So if you're worried about the actual performance against other people you're gaming against, and on a mobile perspective, you can turn on your low latency mode, and it's just a sort of a way to sort of like get those incremental gains from 5G building a low latency business case as opposed to a high speed business case.
Okay.
So that's quite.
Maybe a
I mean,
customer for that.
yeah, it wouldn't. It's obviously not going to bring in millions, but it's
Yeah.
it's just one of those interesting little ideas. And obviously, I mean, I can't remember which telco it actually was, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was somewhere like Korea or Japan or something like that,
Yeah.
where gaming is so much more advanced than it is actually here.
Well, it's interesting because some of our analyst friends have been saying, it's kind of hard to work out how they monetize the latency, because generally it just gets bundled in, and latency's come down a lot over the last 10 years with moving to 3G and 4G networks, more advanced 4G networks, but no one's really sort of said this is a way to kind of make cash.
No, and I would have thought it's a tougher concept to sell to consumers as well.
Yeah.
It's not like I've got
Well, it's hard
loads of
to
mates
explain,
going,
isn't
Scott,
it?
when am I going to
Yeah.
be able to lower latency
Well, I
on my
suppose you have
phone?
to explain to them by saying, look, if you want to do things like virtual reality gaming, it isn't going to work very well on 4G. You need 5G, but
You'll
you
be
also need to pay
throwing
an
up
extra
left, right and
$2 a
centre.
month for it.
Mm.
Yeah, because you'll feel ill if you do it on a 4G connection. Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's that. It's worth chucking it out there, and then there might be surprise. Might be a sudden.
The latency thing's funny because I always assumed that whole low latency stuff going back before MWC was more to do with the sort of enterprise side. You need it for robotics in the factory and
smart factories.
And then all of a sudden it's become, since Mobile World Congress, it seems it's all of a sudden become gaming.
Right.
I mean, we've had Stadia coming out, Google Stadia making a big noise about that sort of thing, and Jamie mentioning this. Mode on the smartphone, but also people demoing games. I think at MWC Deutsche Telekom was showing off stuff with the people that do Pokemon Go, where you kind of play a virtual dodgeball game. Right. You need low latency for it to work.
Yes.
So you need kind of edge computing capabilities to make that feasible.
Maybe they've realised, as I did around that time, that that's about the only exciting use case there is for 5G latency at the moment. Well, for 5G, full stop.
Yeah. Well.
The more mobile broadband one. It's a bit like, I'm already getting 27 megabits per second on my phone.
I think the mobile broadband one is just lower cost for the operators, isn't it?
Yeah, quite.
You increase throughput, and then all of a sudden it becomes a lot cheaper and a more more attractive to deliver high data tariffs.
If you've got, I suppose maybe in somewhere like South Korea, in Seoul, if you've got lots of people who are sitting on a bus watching video, then you do get some kind of degradation of your service. So maybe 5G helps there.
Yeah.
Stadiums. People go to
stadiums.
I wrote about Spurs Stadium this week.
Oh.
That's a bit cheeky of me. I was struggling with something to write, and it's just before the first sort of full disclosure, I'm a Spurs fan.
Yeah. Attendance was still less than at Arsenal's that weekend.
Yes, you're not the first gooner to give me a hard time. I might as well call him out because he's been on this pod. Paul Nolan from CC, I hope you're listening to this. He was emailing me all sorts of lip about the stadium that I had to refute. And he's also an Arsenal fan. But anyway, it's all part of the fun, isn't it? North London aggro.
The stadium thing is a good example. Like stadiums and concerts.
Well, so there's an example. So actually, I can justify bringing it up. Most of the investment that Spurs seem to put into their stadium is in the Wi-Fi. And and I was thinking, is there a 5G angle on this? If they've tried to be a real smart arse, isn't it be like the first 5G stadium in England or something like that? But then I suddenly thought, if the Wi-Fi is properly up to scratch, i.e. every Spurs fan can go in there and get on Wi-Fi and it all works, then why the hell would you need to get on your mobile network anyway? It's not like people are ringing each other up. And even then, you could just do it over OTT anyway. So if you're on the Wi-Fi, my point is...
Not in a stadium setting, maybe not, but there is an argument that... I'm not saying I go along with it, but there is an argument that 5G will, replace Wi-Fi in a lot of settings.
Yeah, but if the Wi-Fi...
Certainly in the enterprise sector.
Are you getting onto things like fixed wireless access, or are you talking about something different here?
I'm just talking about office Wi-Fi environments and factory Wi-Fi, and that's one of the big opportunities for 5G is to
just as a different wireless technology within those confined areas.
Yeah, you wouldn't have Wi-Fi anymore. You would have a 5G like enterprise network.
I see.
And you get rid of Wi-Fi because Wi-Fi is not secure and it's not reliable.
I see.
So it uses unlicensed spectrum.
Yeah,
it's not secure. You can't do things like network slicing. You can't.
Right. Okay.
You can't have those kind of guaranteed service.
So
level. Enterprises want guarantees. They want 99.999% reliability, and therefore, so people like
what they call it, 5 nines
CTO at Ofcom, Mansour Hanif, is it? I saw him to give a talk where he basically said 5G is going to come along and basically get rid of the need for Wi-Fi in lots of kind of enterprise settings.
That makes sense.
He told a crowd of Wi-Fi people that.
Right, and how did that go down?
It's a weird thing
they
to say.
They lobbed routers at his head.
They weren't sort of throwing things at him when he said it. But I just thought it was funny that he...
But yes, and in effect, it's replicating the Wi-Fi use case in so much as you'll have specific, for want of a better term, routers or small cells or boosters or whatever for 5G within the environment.
Yeah.
And if you can make that work, and you get the other benefits, i.e., it's unmetered.
Yeah.
Let's face it, a lot of the reasons we use Wi-Fi is because it's not eating into our data allowance.
I find Wi-Fi quite irritating these days. Actually, more often you find yourself switching Wi-Fi off because otherwise you kind of get login windows popping up and. It doesn't work very well.
No, public Wi-Fi is often awful. That's why it'd be interesting, actually. Maybe I'll just try and blag a visit to the new Spurs Stadium by getting in touch with them and going, it's really important that I write about your Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Actually, I did get in touch with them to write this piece, and they never got back to me, so I don't hold out too much hope.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, just to say I'm writing about your Wi-Fi. How
Yeah.
about throwing me a frickin' bone?
Did
But
proper
they
journalism.
didn't even get in touch.
Proper reporting.
Well, sort of. I firing out an email to some random email address. But maybe I'll persist with that, and then I can talk about
you
it.
might get invited
And
to a
everyone
game.
will know how shameless my blagging of those Spurs tickets have been. But I thought that was a good point. If you're in a stadium, if the public Wi-Fi is good enough, which is a massive if, because we all agree it's generally shite.
Yeah.
But if the public Wi-Fi is good enough and you can get on and it's all good and you're not constantly having to re-log in and all that,
Yeah.
then why bother to get too carried away with 5G in stadiums? But
Well,
I take
that's-
your point
yeah.
about factories, offices.
Well, I'm not
that
saying
sort of thing.
I totally go along with it, but that's the kind of cellular industry's argument. And the other way of looking at it, with the people who are kind of skeptics of these higher speed cellular technologies say, well, Wi-Fi does a lot of that anyway nowadays, and and that's always
Right.
improving as well. You can get gigabit speeds on that now with the latest versions of it. So, and it's
Now they've rebranded it Wi-Fi instead of 802.11.
Wi-Fi 6 is it or something, the latest one, rather than.
That's what, like 30 years after it's invented, they thought, why don't we call it Wi-Fi?
Is it 802.11?
Yeah, that's what it was. That's the technology.
So Wi-Fi 6, I think, is 802.11ax.
Right, there we
But they
go.
don't like to call it that.
No, because it's a bloody
They've
mouthful,
axed
isn't
it.
it? Okay, very good. And before we move on to another thing we wrote about, which is the sort of potential economic benefits of 5G, there have been one or two other launches. Jamie, you just wrote up that Switzerland's getting in there, but it wasn't really full 5G. Is that right? Sunrise?
Well, I mean, it is. It's 5G. It's just not mobile 5G.
Right.
So it's fixed wireless access.
Right.
So you have to. So they're making a plug that to fix the digital divide. You essentially can have 5G wireless access. And that can replace your broadband, where a lot of these sort of rural communities are on copper networks at the moment. So I think like the Swiss are like almost as bad as us in terms of fibre rollout. And I had a look, and it's something like 7% penetration fibre to the home.
Right.
So they're down at the bottom of the league with us. So
Yeah, they've used a lot of
5G.
G-fast, and
yes, yeah.
because they've got sort of difficulties in getting it up mountains.
You
and all
could
that
you
rubbish.
could say their coverage map looks like Swiss cheese.
Oh,
There.
on fire today.
But they've essentially said, like Olaf was in the press release, and he was saying, this is 5G for the people, and it's that's their tagline.
Right.
And effectively, it is a fixed wireless access solution in 150 cities and villages and towns around Switzerland. But the interesting thing for me was like some of the messaging that was in there, and that he was saying stuff like he was comparing the fixed wireless access speeds with speeds that you get over copper networks, not with fibre networks. So he was talking about 10 times speed. Now I can't imagine that would be a fibre connection.
No.
And then also he was talking about fibre in the air.
Right.
Which for me is, it's just a lie. It's not. It's not fibre in the air, because fibre isn't a radio frequency.
Quite.
So one of the interesting things for me was the comparison between the advertising standards in Switzerland and over here. So unless Sunrise is about to get called out. Because I can imagine the ASA would lose their shit if they saw those sorts of claims being done in the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, they
Eventually, probably take about a year, but yeah.
but they would not be happy. A full consultation would be launched. So
Do
Hmm.
you know what one of the problems is in Switzerland with 5G,
What's that?
with using it for mobile, is that the radiation limits in Switzerland are really strict.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what
So-
they were talking about. They can't use millimeter wave.
Yeah,
or something like
and
that.
this is one of the
Okay.
reasons
Yeah.
why they've focused on FWA, because Olaf was talking at a conference last year about this, that if you have the mobile sites they have in urban areas, we'd want to roll out 5G basically just to do mobile services, because there's no point in, that's where they do have fibre. They're right at the upper limit of what they're allowed to have in terms of radiation, because they've got really strict radiation
Right.
limits, like much stricter than EU levels,
I see.
and it's like a problem in terms of introducing mobile 5G.
That's just one of those arbitrary things they just got really twitchy about.
Well, it's apparently it's an
getting
issue there. It's an
cancer
issue in
ahead.
Belgium, which seems odd, because kind of part of the EU. So I don't know how these things are affected by EU regulations.
So there's an overlap there. There's sensitivity about radiation.
We're not talking about Brexit, are we?
No, but they're both strong on chocolate, I've noticed. So maybe there's a link there. Just saying.
But yeah. Anyway, that's one of the reasons they focused on FWA, because they can do they can use it for, in semi-urban or rural areas where there's not the same kind of radiation issue, because they don't have the amount of traffic on those sites, basically.
They'll be laughing when we all get cancer of the head, and they're all right. Yeah. And there's been a bit of a launch. Verizon's launched in a couple of cities in the States, isn't it? Really? It's all city by city. So anyway, it's happening. It's sort of dripping away.
They don't even have the world's best network vendor, do they, in that market? So how have they managed to do it?
Oh, contentious. Well, actually, that does provide quite a good segue to the other thing that I wanted to bring up, which is a report that I wrote up today, and I think you did as well, by what are they called? Begins with A.
The Mobile UK is.
They commissioned it, and the actual analysts who wrote it, I forgot what they're called. Begins with A anyway.
Oh right,
I'll look it up.
But it's basically
Assembly.
It's basically sponsored by the operators.
Well, quite
Mobile UK. Yeah.
So Mobile UK is a trade association for UK operators. They got
lobby group. Yeah. Let's just call them what they are now.
It's a lobby group.
Yeah. Bloody lobbyists.
Well, I guess all trade associations are to some
They
extent.
are, especially the GSMA.
Yeah. Meow. Yeah. Suck on that GSMA. But these guys are just lobbying for UK mobile network operators, i.e. E, Vodafone, O2 and 3.
Yeah.
And they got this analyst firm to do a report. Presumably, they were given a fairly sort of obvious remit, like do a report
and
that is going to conclude
cost $7 billion.
Yeah, quite. And the theme of it was that if the government restricts the ability of mobile operators to use Huawei gear, it's going to cost us loads of money. And it's going to cost us loads of money in two ways. There'll be direct cost, especially to the operators, which is the underlying concern for them. The cost of swapping out, having to swap out some Huawei gear for Ericsson or Nokia gear in the first place.
Yeah.
Because you can't just ban.
Which is a completely legitimate concern.
Yeah, totally.
Completely legitimate.
Because you can't just ban.
Is that legitimate?
Okay, well let's get into it.
Stripping kit out and then putting it back.
Well, I'm not sure that they need to strip much kit out. That's the.
Oh,
issue
okay. Well, that was the point I was just going to make, because they argued in the report that because 5G, at least initially, is built on 4G.
Yeah.
If you're going to ban them for 5G, you're sort of retroactively banning them for a bunch of 4G. Do you not concur with that?
Well, I find that this interoperability with 4G, and they're talking about the RAN, that if you have a because they all use different, they all use core network vendors that aren't Huawei. Basically,
they've all
apart
been
from
staying
BT,
clear
which
of.
is taking it out. So
they've all been steering clear of Huawei for the core for a while.
They're talking about an interoperability issue between the 5G RAN and the 4G RAN.
Okay.
Which I'm just sceptical of that, because if that's a big problem, then why is
do you not suspect that if there is an overarching ban, that the government would turn around and say, or turn around and say, you've got to rip out all your radio equipment as well? Because that would be
that's a different issue. But they very much couch this report as a 5G thing, that if they're banned from 5G, they'd have to go and strip out some 4G equipment as well. And basically have the same. So basically, what they're saying is you need to have the same 4G vendor as a 5G vendor.
That's what I was getting from it. Yeah.
I asked Huawei that earlier this week, and they said no. Nokia doesn't think you need to do.
But then they would. Huawei would, wouldn't they?
No, it's not in Huawei's interest is to say the opposite, because the report's basically saying that you do need to have the same 4G vendor as 5G vendor. If you strip out, if you say you can't use Huawei for 5G, then they need to take out 4G kit and basically introduce another company. So it's kind of more in Huawei's interest to talk up that angle, that that it's going to drive up the cost of taking out 4G equipment because you have this. And then actually they said, well, maybe initially at first, but no, not really. That's not really an issue. The other thing is, 3, which is using Huawei as a 5G RAN vendor, doesn't use Huawei as a 4G RAN vendor. They use Samsung, and they use Nokia,
and yet somehow they can pull it off.
And they've never said that. They've never mentioned that as an issue before.
So
even though they put their name in this report.
So that if you ban them from 5G, you're banning them from 4G.
Nokia says there's an easy workaround. They've been coming out with some. They're obviously trying to. they kind of have a vested interest in talking this up as not an issue, this kind of interoperability thing, because if they can show that you can use two different vendors, then all of a sudden it makes that swap out look much more straightforward.
Okay.
And then then it's not so much of an economic concern for the government if they did come along and decide to ban Huawei. But they say there's quite an easy workaround that you can do.
Okay.
So I'm just dubious that this kind of stripping out all of your 4G RAN stuff is.
Yeah,
and then in terms of getting rid of 5G equipment that's already there, well, Huawei's only shipped 40,000 base stations internationally.
Right.
10,000 of those are in South Korea.
Right.
So that's 30,000 across another 20.
You with these numbers off the top of your head.
Across another 29.
You're so good at your job.
Because I've just written it.
Oh,
basically.
okay.
50,000.
50, but it's still not. Well, they said 40 earlier this week.
They said
in their office.
BT.
So
let's meet in the middle. 45.
Carriers. Paul Scanlon said 50,000 last Friday.
Right. Okay. Well, whether it's 40 or 50,000 across the whole globe, with 10 of those at least in South Korea,
and a ton of them in China,
and probably
presumably.
A lot in China, means that there's probably not very much in the UK.
Grand or two here.
So it's not like you'd have to kind of go, we need to get rid of a load of stuff on 5G that we've already kind of deployed.
So what did you think? So the two sort of headline sort of quantitative findings from that, and one kind of followed on from the other, was that the whole of 5G could be delayed by up to 2 years.
Yeah.
And if it's delayed by up to 2 years, it's going to cost the country 6.8 billion quid.
Yeah, well, which seemed to factor in the costs of replacing equipment,
and then other just
spillover benefits of 5G.
Bits of business we won't be able to do.
I'm sceptical of that as well.
Yeah,
because for all the reasons we've just been saying, it's in the first instance, it's a mobile broadband technology that is, allows people to watch videos on buses. It's not. We're not talking about connected cars and remote control surgery.
Right.
I mean, Vodafone themselves said, their CTO, Scott Petty, said to me at this breakfast briefing they had very recently, he doesn't see any of those kind of trendy edge type applications, the kind of game-changing things economically, coming along before 2023.
Right.
So why a 2-year delay would...
And also the other inference...
I think one of the big things, and I don't know where... I didn't actually cover the report, so I haven't actually read it. But if you don't have if you look at the 4G era, Silicon Valley effectively dominated that because it had an amazing 4G network, and you had a lot of test beds that evolved there, and therefore companies evolved with Silicon Valley as the center of their world, like Uber, for instance, or Airbnb is a bad example, but all these.
I can see why. Yeah, Uber is.
So if you've got
Uber is something that probably wouldn't have come along if 4G had not been there.
Exactly,
I totally agree with that. But
so
I'm not convinced that 5G is in the first instance is going to be.
Okay, well, let me make my point, and then you can counteract it.
Yeah.
But for instance, the innovators of tomorrow are only going to exist if they have the test beds to actually make the products. So if you are first to market with a 5G and a really comprehensive, wide-spanning 5G network, companies are more likely to locate R&D centres there. So that's economic benefit and longer-term economic benefit, because them R&D centres will grow. If you've got the networks and the tools and the ecosystem in place, that encourages startups to develop, and then potentially the next Uber exists. So if you've got the tools, you can create the economic benefit in the long run. Don't get me wrong, I completely get you that these blockbuster services for enterprise to benefit from isn't going to emerge until the tools are actually in place. So you're never actually going to see that knock-on benefit, which I presume the report was talking about. But in terms of creating the 5G ecosystem, unless you actually have the tools, you're not going to foster the startups that are going to be the unicorns of tomorrow. Yeah. So that wasn't their argument. Yes. I mean that is a good point. I agree with that, and that point was made at the Vodafone breakfast briefing. Yeah. Yeah. But that's certainly not what the report's what
talking
the MNOs
about.
are saying.
They're talking about that you don't actually have the services there in the next couple of years, and they were even mentioned. I mean, there were some ridiculous sentences in it. Something about 5G being essential to autonomous cars of the future, and therefore, if this Huawei ban takes effect, which is going to be, slow us down by 2 years. I mean, no one is arguing that a Huawei ban that slows down 5G deployment by 2 years is going to prevent self-driving cars from arriving on UK streets. No one with any sense, and that's basically.
There's a slight inference that if we're
inference in
delayed
there.
by 2 years, we'll always be 2 years behind as well.
Well, I mean, the Release 16 standard, which is critical to a lot of the stuff being done, isn't even ready yet.
Yeah.
So you can't. That equipment for that is not going to be ready until
And that's when
2021,
they're talking
perhaps.
about like edge
So,
computing, virtualization, all that sort of thing,
Yeah.
aren't they?
And you can
Total
do some
cost
of
of
that stuff
ownership.
anyway in terms of the
Okay.
virtualization side of things without the.
Okay. I
without
think
5G.
so. I think we all
So-
agree that there was clearly a sort of predetermined agenda for that report, which is to show. I mean, the interesting thing is to point out that as far as MNOs go, they're really hostile to the government being horrible to Huawei, which is kind of obvious, but it is another
Yeah.
manifestation.
I mean, I
of it.
think it's all a bit academic anyway, because I don't think that they are going to ban Huawei.
No, but even restricting, they're inferring.
Well, I'm not even sure they're going to restrict Huawei.
Right.
I think what they're going to say is, I think the likelihood is that they're going to say something like, you need to have a multi-vendor in-network environment, which wouldn't really affect any of the existing players, because they all kind of have that anyway.
I reckon they're going to come through. I honestly think that it will be along those lines, but they'll put the what you call it, the glass ceiling so high that it won't make a difference. So they'll say, you can't have 50% of your network or any one part of your network, excluding the core, with sitting with one vendor. And I don't think anyone has 50%, or anyone would want. No, actually, Thingamabob might do. Vodafone might
Have what?
more than 50% of their radio with Ericsson.
Yeah, they've got about 60, I think.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
and then that's going to go up because they're swapping out Nokia.
But I'm not sure if they're replacing Nokia with Huawei or with Ericsson.
With Ericsson.
That would be quite amusing if the result of this ban meant that they get
They had to-
more Huawei in the
They had
market to kind of balance it out between the two
take
of
away
them.
Ericsson stuff. Because didn't they say, I think it was 32%
Yeah,
was
Huawei.
Huawei, and the rest of it was a mix
12,
of.
I think 12 Nokia and the rest's Ericsson. Ericsson is their main radio access network vendor. Yeah, has been recognised.
Yeah,
as the
so they
main
could
one,
have
so
to, if the government puts a ceiling on 50% of radio equipment from a
they
single
have to
vendor.
bulk up Huawei.
Yeah, they'd have to scale back, or they'd have to go back
Yeah.
to Nokia.
Yeah.
Well, there's such limited choice that you
Yeah.
can have a bit of sort of whack-a-mole after a while, where you solve one thing and create a new problem somewhere
But
else.
I think that's people that you talk to seem to think that's what's going to happen.
Right.
And then the question is that enough for the US? I guess.
Well, actually, that's perfect, because I was about to bring something up there. One thing that occurred to me writing it, if we take this report at face value and say it is going to have a fairly significant effect on our economy, and then you look at the amount of pressure that the Yanks are putting on everyone to fall into line, well, it's kind of easy for them to say, because they've not allowed Huawei in their networks for ages. So the effect...
Never.
So the effect of, let's say we had among all like NATO types, all Western allies, of saying, right, no more Huawei, the one country that would be least disrupted by that is the States.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an easy request for them to make, but a lot
Yes.
harder for their allies to implement.
Well, it's Europe that's Europe's the kind of victim of all of this. Really, they're the ones that are going to suffer. It's not Asia and it's not America. Because they're not going to get Huawei stripped out of Chinese networks, obviously.
Although I don't think there's a lot of Huawei going on in. We were talking about the Korean 5G at the start. I think.
No, there's no Huawei going on there.
Yeah.
No, there is. The LG U Plus is
I
their customer.
thought it was the short list was Samsung, Nokia, and Korea.
They're in KT, so
Korea and
Ericsson.
KT Core and SKT use Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung as vendors, and LG U Plus uses Huawei. So they have 10,000 Huawei base stations.
Oh yes, of course. You were just saying that
deployed,
before, and that's all
quite a
LG
big
U Plus.
chunk of the amount. that it
LG U
claims
Plus
to
can get in
ship.
trouble with the Americans, man. Donald Trump can come over and have
Yeah.
a word. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's not been any kind of South Korean government ban, has there? It's been
Right.
talked about, I think.
I think it was just a
there's
preferred supplier list, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that really screwed over Huawei.
But LG U Plus, I suspect, is probably not got. Maybe it's not got government contracts.
Right. Well, they're
Because
very
this
much
is
the
one of
third
the things for
vendor.
BT and
The third
Vodafone.
MNO.
I mean, Vodafone was saying at this breakfast thing that Jamie and I went to that it has its own each country does its own risk assessment, and then your risk assessment is largely based on your dealings with the government.
Yeah.
So Vodafone UK has kind of big government contracts.
Yeah.
And that means it has to take a more kind of stringent line. than Vodafone in some other parts of Europe, where they might have no kind of government work at all, perhaps, and then they're more free to use Huawei basically in the network.
So I'm going to force a segue now. This is where we see politics and technology overlapping a lot, which happens to be another theme of stuff that we've written about this week. The thing that prompted me to write a piece on that theme was Google, along with a lot of other technology companies, is becoming it wants to be seen to be consulting more broadly about the ethics of AI. Obviously, we know artificial intelligence is going to start to play more and more of a role, and we're all getting into that. My favourite little apocalyptic bugbear, that sort of Terminator Skynet thing, where we're starting to have machines sort of increasingly make decisions.
Yeah.
And obviously there are massive ethical implications in that. And they formed this board. I can't remember what the full acronym is, but a board to mull that stuff over. And it seemed to be especially in a political context, because they had people from various different parts of the spectrum. And they deliberately wanted, I think they called it diversity of thought or diversity of perspective. And they got one person from who runs an organisation called the Heritage Foundation, I think, which is quite, as Americans call it, conservative. We'd call it right wing. And as we know, Silicon Valley companies tend to be more what Americans call liberal, what we call left wing. And about 1,000+ Google employees just kicked off. They just weren't having it. Having this right winger on there, it was just beyond the pale as far as they're concerned. I actually think. I read they posted something up on Medium about it, a letter, and I thought it was a really poor letter, because it's basically saying, we're not going to stand for this. This isn't diversity of thought. This is wrong thought. It's very Orwellian. This is the wrong sort of person. We're not going to have the wrong sort of person on this. And I wrote about it, but I was thinking, this is just typical of the same company that got rid of sort of James Damore and seems to have a little bit of histrionics about sort of culture war stuff on a fairly regular basis.
I can imagine them all being a bit like this. Yeah.
Well, that's the generalisation. I don't want it too much, because I don't know the companies, but it's a fairly common generalisation that Silicon Valley, San Francisco, is a very leftist sort of place, even though there's just tons of money there. But we can get that's a conversation for perhaps afterwards in the pub. And then today Google capitulated and basically just caved in and just axed this board within a week of forming it, because of all these Googlers kicking off about it. So I thought that's an interesting thing, and it's an interesting little illustration of how big technology companies, especially big Silicon Valley sort of internet companies, are coming under increasing political pressure from both directions. So from their own people, as evidenced by that Google thing, but then they're always under loads of pressure from politicians themselves, from governments and regulators, especially if they run a platform, as Google does, especially through YouTube, as Facebook obviously does, as Twitter does, and one or two others. Every time something happens, like a terrible event like what happened in New Zealand, or countless other current affairs things, there's increasing pressure for these platforms to censor largely, because people will go, well, that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't let these nutters put their propaganda up on Facebook or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, it's hard to prove how radicalised people are by social media versus other means, all that sort of thing. This is probably a discussion that'll go on forever. It's also hard to prove how much less likely people are to become radicalised if you censor on these public platforms. But regardless of all that, the weight of sort of political pressure is definitely against them, and that led Facebook to come out with this call, basically asking to be regulated more.
Right.
Which is a remarkable thing for a sort of commercial company. And I think basically what they're saying is like, look, we can't cope.
Yeah.
Every day there's a new scandal. Look at Facebook. It's been in a state of crisis for a couple of years now. And every time it looks like it's extricating itself, some new thing kicks off that's right in the centre of. And so they've asked to be regulated more.
For them with things like the New Zealand. I mean, you develop a service like that allows you to stream video, and you're obviously doing it because you think it's something that people are going to use to do music videos, and there might be some kind of commercial advantage for a company.
Yeah, and there's live streaming on YouTube, there's live streaming on Twitter as well.
And then all of a sudden, some maniac goes and does what he did and streams it. And I remember getting emails from my son's school actually about it, where they were worried that a number of boys had watched it, and they were kind of worried about the psychological impacts.
Well, yes,
and we were offered
fairly
counselling.
Reasonable
if Raphael had seen it, which I don't think he had. But I mean, obviously, Facebook didn't intend for that sort of thing to happen, and it didn't imagine that it would be used in that way. And you would think it would do what it can to try and prevent something like that, but can you have an AI tool that is able to immediately spot whether somebody's on the in the future, possibly in the future,
it's impossible.
But certainly not for years and years and years anyway.
Because think about what you actually need to train AI. You need data and examples of the thing you want it to spot.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22 situation, because to detect horrible material, you actually need horrible material in the first place for it to train itself on detecting it. So, and then the other thing you got to take into account is it's not just freedom of speech. It's also stuff like Game of Thrones. You know, how do you someone might upload a video of the Red Wedding, and all of a sudden that's incredibly violent, but you know, how do you make a difference between that and an incredibly violent real scenario?
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, AI maybe in the future.
Real life is not medieval.
Right, that's one of the differences.
Well,
Thanks,
that's just an
I'm
example.
kidding.
You know, if AI may be the answer in the future, but right now it just hasn't got the data
exactly.
to train itself to make it.
Well,
I mean, I'm dubious of the argument that these sorts of things, and this I suppose gets into the freedom of speech issue, that it encourages people to go and do the same thing, and it's, to me, it's a bit like the kind of, you know, if you listen to rock music and Marilyn Manson, then you're going to become a sort of person who goes into a school with guns and shoots everybody.
I listen to metal.
I see watching it would actually horrify most people.
Yeah.
And there might be some nutters out there who are inclined to do that sort of thing.
It's just hard to prove.
I think it encourages. I think it would encourage a lot of people that swayed anyway.
Of that mentality.
Possibly, you know, in years gone, these people might not have actually done anything. They would just sit in the pub and moaned about, you know, and moan to like-minded people. But then all of a sudden, you see what someone else can do, and you see the fame that you get from it in that sort of like that micro community, and all of a sudden they want to replicate it and do it themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly viable hypothesis. Again, it's really hard to prove one way or the other, and I guess it comes down to the essential problem that the genie's out of the bottle with the internet and with social media, and so it's out there now. We can now, through our devices, PCs, phones, or whatever, access the whole world whenever we want, and parts of the whole world are pretty crappy places. So they've got a real dilemma there. And I suppose what it comes down to, and we've chatted about this before, but it's probably worth revisiting, which is the sort of legal and regulatory status of online platforms. So they originated as just platforms, as just bulletin boards. They had no editorial control. They had no responsibility over what was uploaded. They were just a blank slate where people could just lob stuff up. And now increasingly they're being asked to take responsibility for what's put up there. And the ultimate extrapolation of that is that they become publishers like we are, and they're responsible for everything that's on there, not only the content but the comments on the content. And as I think we've all agreed, the technology just isn't there now for them to moderate content in real time. Although it does come back to that AI thing. Ultimately, if they're the only way it could be done when it's up to scratch is by AI. But then you've got AI making moral and ethical judgments on human beings, which comes back to that Google thing at the start. So I think they're going to end up having to find some new category for platforms such as Facebook that's somewhere between a pure bulletin board and a publisher. And I think we're going to be a long way. I listened to a really interesting podcast, actually. They're talking about a guy called Count Dankula, which no one's heard of him. Is a Scottish guy who did a YouTube video of him teaching his girlfriend's dog to respond to sort of Nazi slogans.
Yeah, I remember that.
And people, you know, it's clearly meant as a joke, but a lot of people were offended, and it ended up becoming a legal thing. And he went to court and got sentenced and all that sort of thing. And that's become a cause célèbre for freedom of speech fans. But I heard it come up in a podcast, and one guy I thought made a really good point, which is that you've got to have cases like that. You've got to have test cases where the boundaries are tested, where new precedents set.
Yeah.
And so while that's probably not much consolation to Count Dankula himself, you know,
what happened to him in the end? Out of interest?
He got found guilty, but he got fined. He didn't get put in prison.
Right.
He said he wouldn't pay the fine. It's only about 800 quid. And actually, I saw a tweet from him that said that they somehow just went into his bank account and nicked the cash anyway. I didn't know they could do that.
I didn't think they could do that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he just wrote. Maybe he was just trying to rabble rouse a bit. But he just sort of went, "Yeah, they just took 800 quid out of my account." Because he wanted to not pay it, and he wanted to martyr himself and go to prison for not paying it and all that sort of thing. And they just went, "We don't need the hassle. Let's just pile in and nick it out of his account," which is a worrying thing by itself. Anyway, so
I wonder whether that did actually happen.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder.
Sure.
That's just one tweet from the guy. I mean, he hasn't got a big track record of lying, but I don't know him. He could have just been at least sort of embellishing the situation or not telling us something. It's possible. So yeah, that's interesting. That's just going to keep happening. That overlap of politics and technology is going to keep happening. What was the other thing we said we were going to chat about? Notspots. So there are a couple of things. I'll let you start off, Jamie. You were writing a little bit about rural coverage. What's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back. This is back to a bit the politics debates, and then also the digital divide. So obviously there's coverage obligations being placed on a lot of the telcos around the world, depending on what spectrum they've been allocated, and sort of like general, just sort out your 4G coverage as well. And I think in the UK, the government target is to have 95% geographical coverage. So we've got 99% population coverage at the moment, but 95% geographical coverage of 4G by 2023. Now, we're currently at something like 80% or maybe a bit higher, up towards 85.
Right.
Getting to 90 is going to be difficult, and getting to 95 is going to be really difficult.
And then you're talking
because
like Shetland Islands and stuff.
Yeah, you're talking, because what's the point? The livestock doesn't pay mobile bills, and every 3 maybe 4 times a week you'll get a rambler going through there.
Yeah.
There's no
IoT sheep, surely.
Grumbling, no doubt, about he can't get a mobile phone signal, and then writing letters to his
trying to watch Game of Thrones instead of looking at the beautiful landscape.
So this is the issue, and so what was it? So it was about 2 weeks ago. 3, Vodafone and O2 suggested this idea, and they turned around and they said, why don't in all the areas where there's only one operator, we just open up our infrastructure and let all our competitors put on various radio equipment, because there's this great idea of collaboration. The government has come forward, and this is our idea to satisfy it.
Yeah.
And this sounds like a fantastic idea, except when you look at the fact that BT has the widest geographical coverage of all the MNOs. So it is a better supplier in the rural locations.
So that's a differentiator for EE.
Well, I mean,
so they don't want to play ball, basically.
They don't want to play ball because it penalises them for effectively looking, having the foresight to say.
They're probably told to do it by regulators, I suppose.
No, but don't forget, this was EE that was rolling it out, which was a private company until a couple of years ago. So they were rolling that, and it was a selling point for them.
Yeah.
We can provide mobile coverage and data.
We can serve ramblers.
In places, or like where I grew up in South Wales, everyone has an EE contract because
really?
It's pretty much the only thing it's the only
God, I mean, this is South Wales. We're not talking about Brecon Beacons here. I mean, it's fairly densely populated, isn't it?
Not where I grew up. Okay. No, it's incredibly rural where I grew up.
South Wales is quite big, It's not just Cardiff.
Yeah, it's fairly big.
I'm going to get myself in the shit of being ignorant about Wales.
And Brecon Beacons is pretty south as well, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I'm going to shut up now.
The valleys are South Wales, but then this completely erodes the commercial edge which EE and BT created over the years, saying they can sell to customers. Because what is the biggest expense of expanding your 4G coverage? It's not slapping a Huawei base station on a mast. That might cost you a couple of grand, and it would take it might cost you a couple of £100 to take an engineer out there to put it up, or 2 engineers. So the big expense is acquiring the land, navigating the red maze of sort of like local planning laws.
Red tape maze, yeah.
Then also you've got to fibre it up. You've got to get electricity. You've got to hire the staff. You've got to dig it up. You've got to buy all the raw materials. The actual
Colossal faff.
expense of putting up a mast is actually really,
and then to
really
just
high.
then let your competitors lob onto it.
Well, this is the BT position. They go and okay, they haven't actually said this to me. The reason we don't want to do it is because, well, it's a commercial decision. But reading between the lines, you've got to say, well, any competent business person would look at this proposal and say, hold on, we spent a bloody fortune on this. Why on earth would we let our competitors on this? They just get to
do they not even
expand their
do they not
footprints.
even like charge them a fee for using their infrastructure?
They
But
might,
even so,
they
probably
might
not
do,
worth it
but,
for them, is it?
But it
They're not
doesn't.
going to make anything.
Yeah, it doesn't compensate for the
They'd
loss.
have to offer some kind of quid pro quo, like,
Well, this is
we'll buy the beers at the bar on Friday.
So this is the idea that BT have now come back with. They've said in areas where there's one operator, sure, we'll open up our mast, but you've got to offer us the same in a place which is attractive to us. So say I'm EE and you're O2 and you're Vodafone. You both come, you say, right, okay, in the middle of the Brecon Beacons, you've got this mast we want to put our kit on, and I'll go, right, okay, fair enough, but you've got one in the Pennine district which I want to slap my kit on, and you've got one down just on the outskirts of Brighton that I want to slap one on. Agree to that and you can come to my infrastructure. So that's BT's idea.
But they still don't have as much as BT anyway, so it still sounds like it kind of works in their favour.
Well, it is. I mean, it does work in BT's favour, but only because BT have created a favourable position for themselves in the fact that they have more masts around the rural locations than anyone else.
No, that's what I mean. It's like there's not as much for them to kind of stick their infrastructure on that belongs to O2 or 3 because they just haven't got the stuff in the Pennines in the first place.
Ultimately they'll have to, if O2 want to
have to buy
expand
beers
their
at the
coverage, if O2 want to expand their coverage, they'll have to put a mast up.
Yeah.
Which I think, and this is, I think, the crux of BT's thinking. And obviously they haven't confirmed this. This is just me reading between the lines of what they've actually said. They said, if O2 wants to try and win some customers there, well, put up a mast.
Yeah.
Spend the £250,000 that we had to put up a mast.
Yeah.
Put your money where your mouth is, bruv.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, but the other thing they suggested, they've said in the areas where, there is no mobile coverage, which is a really, really low percentage of the UK, and there's no one living there. Okay, 4-way split. We'll all come in together, we'll bung up a mask and we'll put our kit on because there's no commercial benefit for us.
Exactly.
We're just meeting government
we're just doing it to shut the government up.
We're just doing
Yeah.
it to that is an awful one and one for all because the government will screw us all if we don't actually do these things.
I've got one other solution, which is a segue onto my point about notspots. You could always go for low orbit nanosatellites, couldn't you? I know that's on the tip of your tongue.
I was just going to say low orbit nano satellites as a solution.
That's where
to
the
all
smart
our
money is
problems.
these days.
Yeah.
And
Or how much does it cost? How much does it cost to put a satellite into orbit?
I have no idea, but I
does
imagine
it-
a lot.
Ask Elon Musk.
Do you reckon?
or ask Jeff Bezos, which is what I'm trying to lead on to. But
Do you reckon putting 10 masts up would be more or less expensive than launching a nano satellite?
Quite. No,
That's
flamboyant.
that is the big question.
No, well,
Because
I'm
10
clearly
satellites
not.
will probably do the
Clearly
same.
not suggesting it's equivalent. I'm just trying to force it on to the final thing as we're running out of time.
It's not as cool, okay?
It's not as cool yet. Low orbit nanosatellites. That's all the cool kids have got one these days. And the point of these, the reason I mention it is because Amazon. There's a story that Amazon's getting into the satellite game,
Right.
which is surprising. 20 years ago they're flogging your books, now they're putting satellites up in space.
Bezos has always loved his space.
Yeah, he
What
has.
was
Well,
his side
He's
business.
blue something.
Blue Thunder.
That'll do. Yeah.
That's a TV program about helicopters, isn't it?
Yeah. That was Airwolf. Oh,
No,
yeah, there was
two of
Blue
them. There was
Thunder.
Blue Thunder as well.
God, blimey. Before your time, Jamie.
I think I was about 9 when it was on.
noughties?
No, 90s. 80s, probably. 80s, I think we're talking about here. Yeah, we're talking about 80s when you were just a concept, Jamie. But where's the story gone? Anyway, I don't care anymore. Blue Origin, maybe that's it.
So satellites.
Yeah. So he's so he's getting into that game, and actually I knew a little bit about them because I interviewed another company whose name I've forgotten as well. The Alzheimer's strong in me today. I clearly need a beer.
Blue Origin.
Origin.
Correct.
There we are. I'm not as senile as I feared. And the reason, so there's two things. So the low orbit is relevant because of things like latency. If you try and use normal communication satellites, they're too high up in the atmosphere to do very effective like mobile communications because it takes too long for the signal to get there and back again. So that's why you need low orbit ones. But obviously, as you were just alluding to, it's not viable in traditional satellites. The thing about low orbit is you need a lot more of them because they cover a much smaller land area.
The cone, the coverage cone is a lot smaller.
So that's why apparently it's only viable now because the technology is such that you can make satellites for a fraction of what you used to be able to. So you can lob a lot more of the little things up there.
But isn't the vast expense not
Launching
so much making them, but launching?
Yeah.
them? That's the
Well,
big
they're getting better at
expense,
that as
isn't
well,
it?
though, aren't they? So we've
Yeah.
got Blue Origin,
And
we've got
it's gotta be
Elon
up there
Musk
for a while, obviously, because of that.
Yeah, got.
So the technology's got to be fairly future-proof.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues, that you put it up and then some cellular thing comes along and basically steals
Well, I've
your
got to think
business
it's
case.
viable because there's so many people getting involved in it. So there's this Ubiquity Link or whatever their name is, who I chatted to, and then Amazon's getting into it, obviously, and we've got other
I think
satellite
it's good
specialists.
for rural
There
areas.
seems to be money
yeah.
in it. Exactly, and that's why I brought it up there. Obviously, the cost of sticking a satellite into space is far greater than just sticking a mast.
Well, I don't
up.
think it's good for rural areas in the sort of stuff that Jamie's talking about, but it might be good in parts of Africa, I suppose, or
Not necessarily Africa, but obviously Africa, but the US, for instance.
the US. Yeah.
The vast swathes of sort of unpopulated land in the US, like
Right.
the US is massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's huge, and is for places like that, because let's
and
be
there's
honest,
hardly any ramblers there.
Yeah,
There's
there's no
just
ramblers
a few
there.
mountain men,
A few Yetis.
few people from Deliverance.
But then we've got basically, in the UK, I mean, how you could probably walk. You could be stuck down in a completely isolated area, and you could probably go right. Okay, I'm going to walk any direction, and in 4 hours you probably get somewhere.
Yeah.
There's
4 hours. I never need to use my phone that badly. One thing I don't get about these low orbit satellites is how gravity works with satellites.
There isn't any.
But
they're in
That's
well, there
what
is
they're
a
called
bit.
there.
There is a bit because they don't float off into space.
No, they're in escape velocity. It's called.
Is that what it is?
it's enough speed that going that way, so you counteract the gravity, but the
centrifugal,
gravity holds onto it enough that you stay at a perfect distance away.
Geostationary and all that sort of thing. So what occurred to me is that a low orbit one, they're going to have gravity acting on them more severely, you'd think, than the ones that are further out.
Yeah, I guess.
So maybe
they
they've
don't
got to
stay
do
up
what
as
you're
long.
describing. They've got to whiz around even more to make up for it. Anyway, presumably the people who do this stuff have thought of that. They don't keep chucking satellites up and going, "Look, they keep falling down, what's going on?"
Eventually they do.
They do. Yes. That would make it...
Scott is onto something.
Yeah, exactly. Gravity. Isaac Newton. Me and Isaac. Okay, on that note, I think we're sort of done. All right. Thanks for watching. Make sure you join us for the next one.